Assalamu alaikum, very good morning. A very warm welcome to all of you to the second day of the 75th anniversary conference of the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs on Pakistan and the changing global order. The first session of the seminar today it's on Pakistan's foreign policy. It was to be chaired by Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, but he has excused due to some problems. So the session would be chaired by our Honorary Secretary, Dr. Tanveer Khalid. Panelists in the sessions include Dr. Moonis, Ahmer, Professor Vyacheslav, who would join us online, and Ambassador Zamir, Akram. I would request all of them to please come onto the stage. Thank you. Let me introduce the chair. Dr. Tanveer Khalid is Honorary Secretary of the Institute. She was professor and head of the Department of Political Science at the University of Karachi and is affiliated with many academic institutions in Karachi and the other cities in Pakistan. She has been a board member of the Area Study Center for Europe and Applied Economic Research Center, University of Karachi. She is member syndicate of Benazir Bhutto Shaheed University, member board of studies of the Institute of Business Management, IOBM Karachi, and Greenwich University. She is editor of the Pakistan Horizon. And over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Yes. Okay. Today's topic for this session is of great concern and interest, not only for people outside, but especially for people in Pakistan. So before I introduce the learned scholars for today, I would like to express that significance of an independent foreign policy cannot be overlooked, because in a changing world of power politics, determining a clear and independent focus on conducting relations with the powers that be is to be maintained and sustained. Though a balance is expected without leanings on any one power in the global order, the ground realities are seemingly different. Economic concerns, domestic stability and security compulsions, they are the underlying factors and we are striving for an independent foreign policy, especially for not only Pakistan, but developing countries like Pakistan in a fast changing global order. Initially, from the impact of the Cold War to the unsettled situation on our borders and geopolitical and geo-economic challenges, Pakistan has faced a shift in efforts of overcoming a compromised policy in its external relations. Looking forward here to hear the views and opinion of participants through our learned scholars, and I would introduce them now. Dr. Moonis Ahmer is our first speaker. He is former Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Meritorious Professor of International Relations at the University of Karachi. Dr. Vyacheslav Belokrenitsky is the head of the Center for the Study of Near and Middle Eastern Countries at the Institute of Oriental Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow. He has other capacities as well, but he is here to give his opinion on position of Pakistan in world affairs. Especially, did Pakistan have any other options other than going for a Russian initiative? Ambassador Zamir Akram is currently advisor to the Strategic Plans Division, Government of Pakistan, and as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations and other international organizations. He has served the country in many capacities, and we are honored to have him here. So I would like Dr. Moonis Ahmer to begin.
Thank you very much, Chair of this session, Ambassador Zamir Akram. I think, first of all, let me compliment the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs for holding this very important conference on 75 years Pakistan. And the second thing I would like to spell out here is association with the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, a long association. When we were studying the Department of International Relations, and Ambassador Zamir Akram knows very well, and he was in mid-70s and he passed out in 1977. So we used to go to the library of the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs and get ourselves, to read, complete the assignments, and so forth. So that is history. The topic, since I have 20 minutes and we have started late, second day is always like that, more or less, is always like that. But certainly 20 minutes to cover a topic, which is my topic, post-independence compulsions and Pakistan's foreign policy. And I would basically focus as far as the formative phase of Pakistan is concerned. The old Pakistan, not the new Pakistan, the old Pakistan, 1947 to 1971, and then the new Pakistan. So what was the foreign policy all about? What were the challenges? What were the compulsions? What were the realities and the issues at that time, which basically compelled Pakistan, a new state, since we had started from scratch and faced enormous, threats and challenges. And then certainly the way forward, the lessons to be learned first, and then the way forward. Things like that, and the conclusion. Now, there are a couple of questions which must be, examined, analyzed. The first is that why there was a paradigm shift in Pakistan's foreign policy from neutrality, that is 1947, till 1954, era of neutrality. and then the era of alliances. What was the policy of bilateralism in Pakistan's foreign policy? And that policy was basically articulated by the then Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Z.A. Bhutto, way back 1963. What was the negative transformation in Pakistan's foreign policy as far as the formative phase is concerned? What was the positive transformation in Pakistan's foreign policy? The lessons to be learned, the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy, and the way out. Now, certainly the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy, that is how I look at, from 1947 till 1958. And if you stretch it more, 1971. There were four major realities in the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy, and I would also like to quote, I have a list of, the experts and the policy makers, the former policy makers, that how they looked at the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy. So the four major realities: first, the dilemma which Pakistan's leadership faced at that time. Countries with a leadership which lasted long, like Jawaharlal Nehru of India, the Prime Minister, 1947 to 1964. And that gave a semblance of stability to the country. It didn't happen in case of Pakistan. How, there was the impact on Pakistan's foreign policy, because Jinnah, he was in favor of neutrality. Neutrality. Pakistan should be a neutral state. But things changed. The second, fragility and failure of democracy in Pakistan. 9 governments in Pakistan from 1947 till 1958. So you can understand how the lack of stability, and that basically gave rise to the surge of nexus between military and bureaucracy. And the third thing is that even Pakistan had joined Southeast Asia Treaty Organization 1954, and then Baghdad Pact 1955, renamed as CENTO, and then Baghdad renamed as CENTO in 1958. Pakistan participated in April 1955 Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung, Indonesia. Finally, formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy reflected a contradiction. Absolutely, there was a contradiction in the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy, that on the one hand, Pakistan was lured into the anti-communist alliance system. Whatever the reasons were, I don't have time to discuss. But then, if Pakistan was a member of CEDAW and then Baghdad Pact renamed as CENTO, why was it that Karachi, at that time Karachi was the federal capital of Pakistan, decided to establish normal, close diplomatic relations with communist China? You were against communism, then how come Pakistan had developed very, friendly relations with the People's Republic of China, which happened to be a communist state at that time? According to a noted Pakistani historian, Khalid bin Said, who wrote an article in Asian Survey, Volume 4, Number 3, March 1964, that every country pursues her foreign policy in accordance with her national interest. Very true. These interests depend upon a number of factors like cultural and historical tradition, geography, economic and political objectives. And then the reality being that the new state of Pakistan facing a two-pronged threat, one from India, another one from Afghanistan. And then the reality that there was not a focus in the new state of Pakistan for nation building. Instead of nation building, the emphasis was on state building and how the military bureaucracy nexus. And then the old Pakistan, the conflict between East and West Pakistan, how it impacted the foreign policy, because East Pakistan, despite having a majority, was not given an adequate share in the power structure of Pakistan. And the leadership of East Pakistan, later on led by the Awami League, was not interested in terms of the Kashmir dispute or the conflict with India and things like that. Now, another, quotations, my former Pakistani diplomat, S. Irtaza Hussain. Sayyid Irtaza Hussain was the first Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. And how he described the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy. That from the beginning, Pakistan's national strategy has been concerned with the accomplishment of one basic transcending task: the development of such ways and means as could best ensure the country's survival. The quest for survival, the quest for security, national interest, national security. The circumstances in which Pakistan had to start its life as an independent state have been quite different from those witnessed in the case of other countries. Now, so there cannot be any comparison between India and Pakistan in the formative phase. India had established, economic and the communication infrastructure, the leadership and things like that. Pakistan had to start from scratch. And then, another I would like to quote, the gentleman who used to consult regularly the library of Pakistan Institute of International Affairs. And I am referring to Mr. Hussain Haqqani, the former ambassador of Pakistan to the US. Now he is an academician in Boston. But way back, more than 5 decades ago, he used to regularly visit the library of Pakistan Institute of International Affairs. Perhaps, I don't think that he was a student when Mr. Zamir Akram was, Ambassador Zamir Akram was, he was? He joined in 1977, the year you left. So he says in his book, Pakistan between mosque and military, that foreign policy of any country is a reflection of its domestic politics, and Pakistan's predicament since its inception focused on hostile relations with India and Afghanistan, along with perennial security dilemma which compelled its leadership following the demise of Khaza Muhammad al-Jinnah to join the Western alliance systems. Henceforth, post-independence compulsions of the new state of Pakistan shaped determining factors in the country's foreign policy. So therefore, the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy reflected, as I said earlier, a contradiction. That Pakistan established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China on 21st May 1951 to the detriment of Washington. But the same country, Pakistan, after 20 years, was a bridge state between Communist China and the United States. That was when Henry Kissinger, his secret mission to Peking at that time in July 1971. And then, of course, a very realistic account of Pakistan's dilemma in foreign policy. Mr. Khalid Ahmad, in his book, Pakistan, the State in Crisis, way back in 2002, how he described that dilemma in Pakistan's foreign policy, including the formative phase, that Pakistan's articulation of foreign policy is complicated by references to pride and honor. Absolutely. In fact, this articulation is totally out of proportion to the state's ability to pursue any policy activity. The state is hamstrung by its compulsion to revive the economy and provide good life to its citizens. As I said earlier, that Pakistan basically focused on state building instead of nation building. That why Pakistan couldn't become a welfare state. And that is, I think, true even today. But the state of Pakistan feels humiliated. That is what I think, that is something which is important. The state of Pakistan feels humiliated every time it meets reversals in the domain of foreign policy. It feels that the world is ignoring it. It feels that the world is treating India better on the basis of its materialistic attraction to India's big market. It feels that Bangladesh is insulting it when reference is made to atrocities committed by Pakistani forces in 1971 in the then East Pakistan. It feels humiliated every time it has to accept tough IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, conditionalities. It feels deeply grief-stricken after each government fails to convince the world that Kashmir issue should be decided in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions. So that is what Khalid Ahmad, he basically narrated in his book. Why a negative transformation in Pakistan's foreign policy in the formative phase? Abandoning neutrality, decided to join the Western Alliance system, and then 4 major reasons acted as compelling factors for the negative transformation. First, the leadership crisis. Absolutely, in every country's success or failure is its leadership. How dynamic, how visionary, how far-sighted its leadership is, or how myopic, with myopic vision that leadership is. Second, security threats and challenges emanating from India and Afghanistan. Third, parochial vision of Pakistan's policy makers. And finally, absence of path-breaking, innovative and creative research. Now, this institute, that is Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, is the oldest think tank in Pakistan dealing with foreign policy or international relations, established way back, as you know, in 1948. And then in 1973, another think tank was established in Islamabad, Institute of Strategic Studies, but dealing with strategic and security matters. But this Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, the first think tank, there were only 2 departments of international relations in Pakistan at that time in the formative phase, the one in Karachi and the second in the University of Dhaka. The lessons learned. What lessons can be learned? That unless a state is politically stable, it cannot have economic security, and vice versa. Absolutely. What we are facing today in Pakistan, the economic crunch, the threat of default, and then of course the dependence syndrome, that is something which has to do with the past. That Pakistan never ever tried to achieve self-reliance, unlike China, communist China, unlike India. Second, fault lines in decision-making mechanism which hurt Pakistan's sovereignty and national interest. And third, Pakistan was unable or is unable to learn lessons from its neighbors like India, China and Iran, these countries in the domain of foreign policy. And then one needs to learn from the absence of proactive policy-oriented think tanks and research centers. Without path-breaking research on domestic issues, foreign policy issues, I don't think that country has a chance. We never gave priority. We never gave focus. We were never focused on as far as research, path-breaking research, proactive research is concerned. So in its essence, the formative phase of Pakistan's phase of Pakistan and its foreign policy can be a source of debate and discussion among the concerned stakeholders, that what lessons they can learn. Issues like Pakistan's loss of East Pakistan, not transforming the whole of Jammu and Kashmir as its part, we failed. 1948 war, 1965 war, the Operation Gibraltar, the Kargil operation, you name it. And the time when on August 5th, 2019, India revoked Article 370, 35A and annexed Jammu and Kashmir. The die was cast. So that is something which we have to understand. Sanctions which were imposed by the US on Pakistan, all sorts of sanctions, democracy-related sanctions, nuclear sanctions. Instability and conflict in Afghanistan, which posed a serious challenge to Pakistan. So forward-looking approach with perseverance and vision needs to be pursued in the domain of foreign policy so that Pakistan can have a positive mark as far as the world is concerned. I will finish in a couple of minutes. Now, the way forward, the past and present of Pakistan's foreign policy shapes future of country's external relations. I will categorize, there are three types of states. When you talk about, first is failing state, the first is fragile state. It's fragile. It's a weak state. The second is a failing state, and the third is a failed state. So Pakistan as an insecure and a fragile state, despite in possession of nuclear arsenal, has not been able to settle down as a nation state. Still, there are issues, domestic issues, economic issues, political issues, other issues, which continue to threaten the very foundations of the country. What is the way forward to ensure sovereignty? Is Pakistan a sovereign state? And what is sovereignty all about? It's basically when anyone, an individual or a group or an organization or a state is able to make and implement decisions independently. What is the way forward to ensure the sovereignty, economic vibrancy? Because a country's respect is determined on the basis that how good it is as far as economy is concerned. Look at South Korea, which way back in the 50s, in the 60s, was a poor, impoverished country, used to consult Pakistan, its 5-year plans. And South Korea is now world's 11th largest economy. Its GDP is around $2 trillion. Its exports are several $100 billion. I'm not trying to compare. So unless some brainstorming is done by the concerned stakeholders of foreign policy, which was not done in the formative phase, and the stakeholders, Foreign Office, and Ambassador Zamir Akram knows very well that there are certain no-go areas in foreign policy of Pakistan where no civilian government can encroach. These no-go areas, India, Afghanistan, nuclear issue, United States, China, perhaps also Iran. So, who is in control in Foreign Office? Who is in control as far as foreign policy is concerned? Stakeholder. And then, of course, the Parliament. Where is the Parliament as far as foreign policy is concerned? Security agencies, corporate sector, and academia. Fault lines in the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy must be understood and analyzed with critical thinking so that issues which impacted on external relations are properly handled. Furthermore, crisis management. We all talk about crisis and crisis management, but then we failed as far as Pakistan's in its, you can say, formative phase, a very threatening crisis, that is 1971 East Pakistan crisis. It's a classical example of the mismanaged crisis. And who was responsible? The former Chief of Army Staff, He said that it was a political defeat, it was not a military defeat. That is a source of discussion and debate. So critical thinking, analytical approach, that is something which is missing because Pakistan is still a tribal feudal state with the characteristics, unlike many other states. Furthermore, crisis management mechanism in foreign policy is the need of the hour. But we only talk as far as challenges from Afghanistan concerned, India concerned. We are repeating things, United States, Russian Federation, Iran, Afghanistan, and so forth. So ironically, unless Pakistan is economically vibrant, politically stable, and with a leadership empowered with perseverance and vision, clarity, there is marginal likelihood of Islamabad achieving a stature in global affairs. Do we matter? And then we regret that why India is giving importance. It is giving importance because this year on August 15, 2022, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, while addressing the independence, the ceremony from Red Fort, Delhi, he said that our vision being that by 2029, India will be the world's third largest economy. And the vision, 2047, that is 100 years of the partition of the Indian subcontinent, India will be number one. That is, I don't know whether it will happen or not. But unless there is a leadership which thinks not the vision which we had basically experienced or listened to Mr. S.N. Iqbal, the Federal Planning Minister, in 1999, he was saying vision 2010. He again came to power in 2013. Then vision, it became vision. It became vision 2030. So that is not the way. That is not the way. So respect of a nation is earned and it's granted if the state is not dependent on foreign aid and its sovereignty is not mortgaged. So during 50s and 60s and 70s, Pakistan's image internationally was better, unlike 80s, 90s and post-2000, and it was not blamed of promoting religious extremism and terrorism. So the image of Pakistan also suffered badly because of poor economy, bad governance, political stability, and behavior of some Pakistani nationals abroad, that they were held responsible for drug trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities. Finally, so in its essence, the formative phase of Pakistan and its foreign policy can be a source of debate and discussion among the concerned stakeholders with the purpose of learning lessons from debacles and successes. So therefore, I think the time is up, and thank you very much for your patience, because the reality is whether people agree or disagree, which I don't subscribe to that reality, that people don't want to leave mic. They don't want to leave the seat of power. These two realities are very noticeable. But finally, having said something about the formative phase of Pakistan's foreign policy, or misfortune, or luck, I'm not giving you a negative assessment, but 75 years, that's a long time. It's not 10th century, it's not 12th century, it's not 13th century or 16th century when time was slow. But this is 2022. This is 21st century. So if we have not been able, if you are still confused, if you are not clear, and our stakeholders, they compromise on national security, they compromise on national interests for protecting their own interests, that gives, I think, it has a very negative impact as far as foreign policy is concerned. Look at Jaishankar, the Indian Minister of External Affairs. They don't have a foreign minister, they call it Minister of External Affairs. Jaishankar a very learned person, certainly, a well-articulated person, the son of Indian nuclear strategist K. Subramaniam. K. Subramaniam, an icon as far as. So we have to be mindful of the fact that in leadership we need to have people who have integrity, who have patriotism, who are committed to their country, leadership which is clear, visionary, and goes for long-term interests, not short-term interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Moonis, for such a clear analysis and with the suggestive approaches to Pakistan's foreign policy. I hope we are able to come up to those standards whenever the chance comes. I would like to invite Ambassador Zamir Akram, who will be giving his views on outlook for the future, relations with China and the United States.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Masuma Hassan for inviting me to participate in this very historic and session to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, an institute with which I have very fond memories, because when I was studying for my master's degree and for my civil service exams, I used the services of the library. It provided tremendous opportunities to do research and a space to study. And so it's an honor and a pleasure, privilege to be back and to speak at this very important occasion. The topic that has been assigned to me is Pakistan's foreign policy outlook for the future, with a focus on relations with the United States and China. And I will try to do that within the context of the overall theme of this seminar conference, which is Pakistan and the changing global order. I have submitted a paper on my presentation, which I'm sure you have seen amongst all the papers that have been distributed. But for the purposes of time, the paucity of time, I will present a summarized oral version of what I have written. So I think that we need to begin by understanding, recognizing that it's obviously very difficult to predict the future. And particularly in the context of Pakistan, it is extremely so, because we can't even predict what's going to happen next week. So we need to be cautious in how we consider the future outlook for Pakistan's foreign policy. But still, I think it is possible, because history is a continuum. And so based on previous experience and present realities, we can make some reasonable assumptions about the future outlook. Now, I would like to divide the consideration of Pakistan's foreign policy outlook for the future into two broad categories or two approaches. The first is to look at what are the constants, the constant features of our foreign policy. And in that context, what comes to mind obviously is that the perennial quest for Pakistan has been for its security. As Moonis spoke before me about the historical perspective, so I won't repeat that, but the fact remains that due to the interplay of history, the legacy of disputes, in particular with our two current immediate neighbors, with Afghanistan and with India, as well as the interplay with the second constant, that is geography, and our geographic location. Both these constants have combined to create a perennial quest for security, and I think that going forward in the future, these two constants, which cannot be changed, and we will have to live with the realities and deal with those realities, so they will be a very important factor in the formulation, implementation of our future foreign policy. Then there are the variables. Most important variables, of course, is the domestic environment of Pakistan, of any country. Any country's foreign policy is heavily dependent. In fact, you cannot have a foreign policy unless you have a successful domestic environment. And in Pakistan's case, of course, we have been unfortunate that in our domestic environment, we have been dealing with recurring bouts of instability, political instability, which have generated similar difficulties arising from economic hardships, economic challenges, even economic meltdown. In fact, the aspect of political instability and economic weakness is so consistent that one may even consider this as a constant factor for the determination of our foreign policy. But in any case, this is a challenge which has existed in the past, it exists now, and for the foreseeable future, it is more than likely that it will continue to exist unless we are able to get our domestic act together. The other variable, of course, is the global environment, and that's the specific topic to which we need to place our foreign policy in the context of the changing global environment and how that is going to impact on the pursuit of Pakistan's foreign policy objectives. So, as I mentioned, the key objective is going to be, will continue to be, ensuring our national sovereignty, territorial integrity, so in other words, our security. And flowing from security is going to be the other related aspects of our economic relations, our trade relations, our ability to exercise soft power at the global level. All these factors are going to have to be put into the context of how we are going to be able to ensure our national security in the future. Now, I think putting it in the context of this conference, and that is the global and regional, that is the global changing global environment. I want to say a few words about this. In my view, this is a tectonic change that has, in my has already taken place. I mean, it's commonplace for people to say that the world order is changing, and how is it going to be in, say, another 5 or 10 years' time. I would argue that the world order has already changed. And the greatest example of that change is the war in Ukraine. Now let me back up and say why I say this. So this is a tectonic change which started to take place almost immediately after the collapse or the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the emergence of the United States as the sole superpower, which was the global hegemon in a unipolar world. And since that time, roughly 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, till about, I would say, 2008, the United States remained the sole superpower. It was the global hegemon, and it pursued a policy which you can describe as a zero-sum policy. In other words, a policy in which the US would not tolerate the emergence of any peer competitor. That meant, in particular, China and Russia. And since that time to the present, and if you just look at the Biden administration's national security strategy for 2022, it's very clear that the United States is pursuing the strategic objective of preventing the Chinese, the People's Republic of China, and Russia to compete for America's unipolar domination. However, ever since the US started pursuing this policy and implemented this policy through such approaches as American exceptionalism, unilateralism, and preemption, leading to, policies that were actually strengthened by the September 11, 2001 attacks, when the US saw an opportunity, or at least used that opportunity, to begin to implement wars with no exits, almost a permanent state of war around the world, in which a kind of Pax Americana was to be ensured, starting with what is termed by George Bush as the Greater Middle East, and involved the invasions of Afghanistan, of Iraq, interference in Syria, Libya, but more meaningfully, more substantively, significantly, the emergence of competition between the United States and China on the one hand and Russia on the other. And this competition started almost immediately after the disintegration of the Soviet Union in Europe, when the Clinton administration started a process of the eastward expansion of NATO, which was obviously meant to contain Russia and ensure that Russian power in Europe would be limited, in fact, would be constrained from influencing any of its neighbors. And in the Asian context, the United States, particularly under the Obama administration, started this pivot to Asia policy, and that has been pursued with the creation of multilateral alliances such as the Quadrilateral Alliance, the AUKUS, the Australia, United Kingdom, United States partnership, and also in encouraging the European allies, the NATO allies of the United States, to play a more proactive role in the Southeast Asian sector or domain. And you see the involvement of the UK in AUKUS. You also see the French playing an independent role in that context. So this was accompanied by strengthening existing military alliances with countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and creating new strategic partners, that is, countries like India and to a certain extent Vietnam. So that has led to or created a backlash, obviously, by the Chinese and the Russians, and these two countries have since almost the last decade been engaged in a growing strategic partnership against the United States. This is exemplified by their strategic partnership, as also by the creation of organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So the result has been that today, while the US still pursues or tries to pursue its zero-sum policy, on the other hand, you have pushback by the Russians in Europe, and yes, they have invaded Ukraine, but the purpose of invading Ukraine, the real underlying purpose of invading Ukraine is to demonstrate that the Russians are no longer going to accept the expansion of NATO designed to contain Russia in Europe and elsewhere. That's the underlying reason. And that's why it's such an important reason, it's such a significant reason, because there is no going back. Yes, there can be a ceasefire and there can even be a solution in Ukraine, but I don't see the Russians backing down from what the action they've taken. Similarly, the Chinese have drawn very clear red lines. Taiwan is a very big, bold red line where they have demonstrated that they will not accept any kind of change in the status quo. Western American interference in Hong Kong, the domestic politics of Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, in Tibet, are all red lines for the Chinese. And they have made this very clear. And with the alliance that they have with the Russians, they feel that this is the time that the unipolar world that came into being after 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union has now become a multipolar world. And it is a world in which there are three powers: the United States, Russia, and China. So this is a change that is not going to be reversed no matter what the Americans and their allies try to do. And the strength of this is that if you see, I recently read a report by the Belfer Center of Harvard University, which is quite revealing because it demonstrates how at least in the context of China and the US, it's called China and the US Rivalry in the 21st century, how the Chinese have been able to equal, if not outpace, the United States in four key areas. One of them is, of course, in military technology, in military power, just pure military power, where the US is no longer talking about domination or strategic dominance, but strategic deterrence. That's a very major change in the American approach to dealing with China. Second is in technology. In technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, even 5G. These are areas where the Chinese have in many ways overtaken the United States. And that's why the Biden administration is now trying to gain ground and has, for one thing, denied access to chips technology for the Chinese in order to gain ground against them. And the third area is, of course, technology. The economy. The Chinese have been growing for 40 years. The Chinese have been growing at a rate of at least 4 times higher than that of the United States. Today, the world economy is being driven by the Chinese economy. And the fourth part is in diplomacy. I mean, the Western countries have described it as wolf diplomacy, but in real terms, it's aggressive diplomacy. The Chinese, for years, I mean, during the Deng Xiaoping's advice to his foreign policy, people used to be that you must hide your strength and bide your time. Under Xi Jinping, it was very, very clear. If you see what happened at the first summit meeting between the Chinese and the Americans in Alaska, in Anchorage, when the Chinese foreign minister, the Chinese advisor on foreign policy basically said that you are in no position to tell us, you do not have the strength anymore to tell China how we need to behave. And we will do what we think what is necessary for protecting China's international interests. So these are the 4 key areas in which China is challenged. And similarly, the US national security strategy and what the accompanying documents, the nuclear posture review and the defense strategy, they all recognize that for the first time in history, the United States is going to be confronted with 2 major nuclear weaponized states. And so it's no longer a confrontation as it was in the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. But now the United States is confronting two major powers at the same time, and that has obviously strategic implications. Now, coming to what is important for us, and that is our own region and how this change globally is affected our own region. Two very important, I mean, there are many ways, many areas where we can see this, but two are absolutely critical. One is the impact that it has had on India. The United States, as I mentioned earlier, has sought new strategic partnerships to contain China. In this case, it has engaged in a partnership, a strategic alliance with India, with the result that India is now considered as a major strategic partner and a net security provider. To make this happen, the United States has signed 4 foundational agreements for defense and intelligence cooperation, transfer of technology, which has enabled the Indians to enhance and modernize, update their military capabilities, both in the conventional areas and in the strategic areas. They are also being given access directly by the United States or by some of its allies like Israel and France in the areas of space, in the areas of artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and even biotechnology. So these are the new areas of warfare where they have this very close cooperation. This has enabled India, and then of course there has been, since 2004, there has been this civilian nuclear cooperation agreement between the US and India, and the US facilitated waiver by the nuclear suppliers group for the Indians, which has enabled them to obviously enhance their nuclear arsenal. This is a subject in its own, but we don't have time to go there. I could answer there, but that's absolutely very essential, because this kind of enhancement of India's conventional and particular strategic capabilities has put in doubt the strategic deterrence that came into being after the nuclear tests of 1998 by India and Pakistan. In 2004, as a result of the encouragement that they were getting from the US, the Indians moved their strategic goalposts and started talking about a cold start doctrine, which means that they could consider launching a limited conventional war under a nuclear threshold. When Pakistan responded to that by 2011 by adopting a posture of full spectrum deterrence, which meant deterrence at the tactical, operational and strategic levels, by development of short-range missiles and low-yield nuclear weapons, the Indians have now moved on towards what they call a preemptive first strike capability. And that means that if they are able to launch a preemptive strike against Pakistan, destroy its nuclear capabilities, they would have the American and Russian supplied ballistic missile defenses to protect their own cities and their own assets. So this is a major transformation in the Indian profile, nuclear deterrence profile, defense capabilities, objectives, which has had a tremendous impact on strategic stability in our region. It has also enhanced India's belligerence, its ability for Mr. Modi to talk about pursuing a muscular policy and to say that these weapons that we have, these nuclear weapons, are not for Diwali or that they are something that, implying that they are there for a first strike. This kind of change will have to be dealt with by Pakistan going ahead in the future, and we will have to deal with not only the threat from India per se vis-a-vis the issues that exist between us, but in terms of India's ambitions for regional domination or even global a global role as a global power. Now here is where I need to, in a way, disagree with a lot of the received wisdom that the real problem between Pakistan and India is the Kashmir dispute. I don't think it is the Kashmir dispute. The Kashmir dispute is a symptom of a deeper, more wider problem. And that problem has been there since the very beginning. And that problem is India's ambition for regional hegemony and a global power status. To achieve that, India already has ensured that its neighbors, smaller neighbors, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, whatever, basically accept the Indian hegemonic role. There's only one country that doesn't, and that's Pakistan. And that remains the ambition, that Pakistan needs to be brought down to its knees so that it can accept Indian hegemony in the region. And it's that attitude which has been clearly articulated by Mr. Modi, because Mr. Modi says what's in his heart. His predecessors also had the same thing in their heart, but they didn't say it. The difference is that Mr. Modi is saying what he really wants. But that's something that we need to deal with in the future, given the fact that the Indians are so clearly entwined, their interests are so clearly entwined with the United States. It's going to be an extremely difficult task to do that. So, the other issue, of course, is Afghanistan. Now, it's a long history. I don't want to repeat it for the sake of time, but the fact is that today we think we succeeded in our long-term, almost 30 years of the 30-year policy of ensuring that a so-called friendly government comes into power in Afghanistan. Well, they are there, but they are not that friendly as we expected them to be. I think there are various reasons for it. One of the reasons is that they genuinely lack the capability of trying to deal with our main concern, which is the groups of terrorists like the TTP, the BLA and others, the ISIS-K, which are still operating in Afghanistan. But it's also, I think, there are ideological, historical linkages between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban, which prevents them from taking action against them. And so that is a challenge that we will continue to face in Afghanistan. The other challenge, of course, will be because the Taliban have not been able to stabilize Afghanistan, we will continue to have that threat from on our western borders. The third aspect of this is that because of 20 years that the Americans invested in a futile exercise to defeat the Taliban, and now roundly blame Pakistan for their defeat, that has had a negative impact on our relations with the United States. And so this is something that, again, it will take some time for the Americans to overcome this sense of grievance of Pakistan playing a double role or stabbing in the back, however you want to look at it. But I mean, there's a whole argument, counter argument to this, but we don't need to go into it at that time. The important thing is that this has influenced America's outlook towards Pakistan. But it's not all a bad story as far as Pakistan is concerned, because I think the one area that we could use that Afghanistan could be a positive factor, provided, of course, peace and stability, which is a big if, peace and stability returns to Afghanistan. But if it does, and hopefully it will, a peaceful Afghanistan can open up avenues for regional connectivity in which Pakistan can play a very, very critical role. And the good thing is that here is an opportunity that has already been there and it has been useful as well, and that is the convergence that exists between Pakistan, China, Russia, and even Iran to a certain extent over Afghanistan. And so this is a hopeful side for the future, that if we can build on this kind of relationship, how is that going to help us with our domestic issues, economic issues, with our ability to outreach, which regional connectivity, all those things can have a positive impact. So while we are going to navigate through this greatly transformed situation, globally, regionally, and domestically, I think the most important thing, I'm going to enter, I've just come to the end. We have in our public discourse on television, etc., even the current foreign minister, the past foreign minister, they have all talked about having balanced relations between the United States and China and Russia. I'm going to put myself out there, open to criticism, by saying, yes, it's good to talk publicly about balanced relations, but it's not possible. Let's be realistic. You can't have balanced relations between countries that are at each other's throats. And so how are you going to balance relations between competing America with China or competing America with Russia? So I don't think that a balanced relationship is possible. In real terms, we need to follow a policy which we need to see where our interests lie. And where our interests lie is where the convergence lies. And I would argue that today and for the foreseeable future, there is no strategic convergence that is possible between the United States and Pakistan. In fact, I would even argue, put myself out to more criticism, that there never has been a strategic convergence between Pakistan and the United States. Pakistan has been useful, yes, tactically useful for the US whenever they wanted to use Pakistan against Soviet communism or Chinese communism, against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, or against terrorism again in Afghanistan. But on its consistent strategic, in itself, Pakistan is not strategically important for the United States. It is totally the converse when it comes to China. Pakistan is, particularly after 1962, but right from the beginning, Pakistan has been strategically relevant for the Chinese, for many reasons which we don't have the time to go into, but that strategic convergence is even more today than it was in the past, for three main reasons. One, I just mentioned Afghanistan, so I won't repeat that. Two, there is a strategic convergence between us and the Chinese in order to contain a belligerent China, convergence between Pakistan and China to contain a belligerent India. And we have seen this happen, the 2019 confrontation over Balakot, the June 20 onwards confrontation between China and the Indians, which is still continuing. It's not a coincidence that for the first time after the 1965 war, the United Nations Security Council took up the Kashmir issue in the Security Council. It didn't happen because of us, it happened because of the Chinese. And that's because the Chinese see what the Indians have done in Ladakh, a territory that they claim, as having violated the Sino-Indian agreements of 1984 and 87. So that is why the Chinese have reacted the way they did in the Galwan Valley and are still there and are continuing to put the Indians under tremendous pressure. So there's the three things. Third, going forward, we need to have an alliance with the Chinese, a strategic partnership with the Chinese in new technologies for warfare. No one else is going to share with us technologies for artificial intelligence. No one is going to share with us technologies for cyber warfare, space. How are we going to respond to the Indian capability to destroy satellites in space? That's the future of warfare. And the only country that has willingly enabled us to launch satellites and is able to help us develop our own capabilities in space is China. So I would argue that for all these reasons and for many more that we have not been able to go into, we have no choice. We have to have a strategic alliance with China. I don't say that we need to cut off relations with the United States, but what I want to say and underline is at no point should we sacrifice our relations with China for the sake of relations with the United States. But unfortunately, that is what we have been doing. And the very clear example of that is our inability, in fact, our abject failure to provide security to Chinese personnel working on projects related to CPEC. And all these bureaucratic hurdles that are created, the judicial interference that is created in CPEC projects, it is really trying the patience of the Chinese. Let me tell you this very clearly from my own experience of talking to the Chinese. They are concerned. For the first time, they say we are concerned about where Pakistan is going and what is the future of our relationship. So let me end on a quote a senior colleague of ours, a Pakistani diplomat, former ambassador to China and former foreign secretary, Sultan Ahmad Khan, had said about Pakistan and China. And this is very telling. He had written, Pakistanis love China for what it can do for them, while the Chinese love the Pakistanis despite what they do to themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for such a comprehensive expression. I would now request Dr. Vyacheslav Belokrenitsky, who will be speaking on the topic, Were There Other Options? Pakistan-Russia Relations. He is representing the Institute of Oriental Studies, the Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow, and he will be with us online sharing his views. Dr. Belokrenitsky, sir.
Yes. First of all, let me say that I was much impressed by the presentation, by the speech given by Ambassador Dr. Zamir, Mr. Zamir Akram, and I fully agree with his analysis of the present-day situation in the world, and with the analysis he gave to the events, very tragic events that are going there in Russia and the Ukraine. This is really a very deep-rooted analysis and very realistic analysis that he has presented. And I will agree with almost all the points he has raised. As for my paper, it is, I hope, is distributed and you can have a look at it. But I would like to just to summarize certain points for some minutes, saying that as for the predetermined course of the relationship between Pakistan and Russia, I think it was really preordained due to certain factors. First of all, the factor of Afghanistan, and the other is the factor of India. And the strategy of Pakistan was predetermined, and Pakistan had chosen the relationship with the United States, and in the atmosphere of the Cold War, it meant that the relationship with Russia of the Soviet Union were relegated to the second to the second place, and therefore they were not very well developed. So I, in my paper, consider it to be a certain fate of our relationship. And the history of the Pakistan-Russian relations, I divided into 4 long periods, long waves. The first one from the late 40s to the beginning of the 60s. That was a very low-key development, and low-key relations were maintained, though with some ups and downs. And then the second phase is in the 60s and 70s. This was in the first phase of upgrading of Pakistan-Russian relations, and the symbol of this upgraded relationship was the construction of the Pakistan steel mills near Karachi, and the USSR at that time was has an opportunity to provide substantial financial and technical help to Pakistan. And unfortunately, this symbol is now somehow, this Pakistan steel mills is somewhat in a critical position since last several years. Hopefully, it may be revived. It may be this situation can be changed in future. So this second wave or second phase was more favorable for our relationship. Then the third phase came in the 70s, late 70s, 80s, due to the war in Afghanistan and the events leading to the disintegration of Pakistan, of the USSR. This is, of course, the step down. And the 90s also saw this step down relationship and very low-level relationship in our mutual relationship were very low-key. And then from the beginning of this current century, there was a second phase of the upgraded Pakistan-Russian relations, and also with certain ups and downs. So I pursue that, and I consider that there are certain prospects for the development of our ties, or for the strengthening of our ties, of the ties between our two countries. Though they are, and I would agree with the previous speaker, that they are probably rather limited because of the priorities given by Islamabad in its foreign policy, and the priorities of Russia as well. I think we should not expect too much from the relationship between our countries, but certainly we should make efforts to promote them, to strengthen them, and we should move step by step, and should not, I think, consider it possible that they experience certain revolutionary changes. Let us move step by step. With some, I would like to suggest that in addition to this agreement on the Pakistan Stream pipeline, there are certain issues that can be taken by both sides. I consider, for example, that the issue of the great city problems is a matter of probable our mutual concern. For example, as you know, the twin cities are St. Petersburg and Karachi are proclaimed as twin cities, and I hope and I consider that there is another pair of twin cities possible. Is that Moscow and Lahore can become twin cities, and the officials and the technical experts from these cities can work together in order to overcome the big cities problems that are there, very acute they are in Pakistan as far as I know. Therefore, there is one prospect. Of course, the broadening of our ties, humanitarian ties, man-to-man contacts. There are other fields like connectivity. Of course, connectivity to Afghanistan, if it becomes possible, then it makes it really practical to develop certain schemes of connecting by road, by railroads, our two countries, not by sea only, but by routes, land routes too. So, and then of course, this energy, infrastructure fields, everything can be developed and can be thought out in the perspective of growing relationship and fruitful relationship between our two countries for the sake of the economic and social progress of Pakistan and Russia. With these short comments, I would like to say thank you and for your attention. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We will be taking certain questions. If you are available online, kindly respond if you want to.
Yes. If you keep me, I would like to respond.
Yes. Okay. So we have 20 minutes for a question-answer session. I would request that first, anybody who wants to put a question to Professor Belokrenitsky, that should come first so that we do not go for another disconnect. And then afterwards to the other learned scholars. Any questions for Professor Belokrenitsky?
Thank you, Chair. This session is most interesting and absorbing. My question is specifically to esteemed guest in Moscow. Just as the US for some time saw the relationship with Pakistan in the context of India, the hyphenated aspect, in your view, does Russia take an independent perspective vis-a-vis Pakistan, or is it entirely contingent or predominantly determined by Russia's relations with India?
Yes, thank you for this question. It is a very good question. We are actually debating this. As scholars, we are not quite sure whether this is the is this really determined only by the relationship between Moscow and New Delhi, or is this not the case, or this is not the case? I consider that is, of course, the relationship with Pakistan are to a great extent dependent on the relations of Russia with India. This happened historically. And in my paper, I begin with this discussion of this issue, how from the very beginning, Russia, or the Soviet Union at that time, moved closer to India rather than to Pakistan. And you can see it in my paper that there were certain subjective and objective reasons for that. As for the for example, in the second phase of our relationship, Pakistan was considered to be of independent importance. Independently, it was important for Russia. In the 60s, for example, there was a very even-handed approach of Russia to India and Pakistan. In the war of 1965, as you know, Russia, the Soviet Union took the neutral position, and that was a genuine position. After that, of course, in the aftermath of the Afghan crisis and of the involvement of Russia, of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, this had become dependent upon also Indians' standpoint. Again, Russia was put against Pakistan objectively. And nowadays, in the beginning of the 21st century, in the first decades of the 21st century, for Russia, of course, it is very important to have good relationship with India because of the military cooperation that we do have with India. It is very profitable. It is very fruitful for our diplomats and military persons to have India as one of the major buyers of Russian weaponry. At the same time, in the recently, Pakistan, I hope, has acquired a certain independent position in the eyes of the Russian policymakers. And in Moscow, Pakistan now is seen as, of course, as a country of lesser importance to Russia, but still of independent importance due to the strategic position that Pakistan has. Due to the Pakistan, this is also taken into account. Of course, Afghanistan also is an issue that is considered in Moscow to be resolved with the help of Pakistan. Therefore, I consider that Pakistan, of course, is seen now as one of the biggest from the point of view of population, biggest country in the world, and it is, of course, in the shadow of India. But at the same time, it is also considered to be of importance of its own. Therefore, I'd like to answer in just to say that it is on the one hand, much depends on our relationship with India, but there are certain things that make Pakistan an independent entity for the Russian policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Would it be possible for you, Professor, to comment on Quad and AUKUS, how Russia is really responding to that? These two pacts with reference to India, and is there a word of caution that you may want to convey to Pakistan on these two pacts?
I hardly, unfortunately, due to this bad connection, I could not get the essence of your question. Will you summarize it very, very shortly?
Yes, I just want your comments on AUKUS, that is Australia, UK, US Pact, which has been recently formed, and also Quad, which is India, Japan, Australia, and how Russia is really responding to that, And is there a word of caution on that you may want to give to Pakistan?
Yes, it's right. I got it. Yes, of course. I would say that definitely this quadruple, this union, including India and the United States, it is of course mentioned. It is of course taken into account in all the discussions and in the analysis that is made Russian policy making circles. It is taken into account that India is moving closer to the United States, and of course it is considered to be of concern. But at the same time, Moscow takes it into account that India is too big to to throw her out of a relationship with it. So it is considered that probably India can have these kind of relationship with the United States, and at the same time, Moscow doesn't want to make it go too far to that side. It doesn't want to push India wholly to the United States. It doesn't want to make to give India an excuse for going too far in its relationship, in its stronger relationship with the United States. Therefore, it is, I would say, tolerated by the Russian policymaking circles.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Any other questions for Professor Belokrenitsky? Then are there any other questions for our worthy speakers for today? Yes, we just...
Question to Ambassador. So, thank you for very lucid and encyclopedic coverage of the foreign policy imperatives. And your recommendation that balancing relations is not possible and China exercise should be taken as a strategic option and that's the way forward. In proposing that, in your summary of last 2 or 3 decades, you did not mention the economic and technology relations that Pakistan enjoys with the West. And trade relations with US, UK, EU, technology standards that seem to have slowly gone down because of closer relationship with China, direct foreign investment that an economy will need for a turnaround. So I was wondering that if you would like to reflect the economic cost of exercising the China card, so to speak.
Well, I believe that there is no economic cost. Actually, there is an economic benefit. And when you say that the advantages or the opportunities that we have in terms of trade with the Western countries, in terms of trade, I'm not suggesting that those should be abandoned. We should continue to pursue them to the extent that we can, and that where we have the opportunities to pursue them. So it's not a choice between either or choice. Wherever we can, we should. Like we have this GSP plus agreement with the EU, and if the EU is willing to continue with that process, well and good, and we should do that. But let us not also underwrite, or not underwrite, but underplay the economic aspect of the Pakistan-China relationship. Let me remind everyone, those particularly the younger generation, that in very key areas, particularly in terms of our economic infrastructure, our defense capabilities, from the very beginning, the relationship with China has contributed to this. Yesterday, in the presentation on the nuclear power, it is only the Chinese that have helped us. Initially, during Mr. Bhutto's time with Chashma 1 and 2, and then the other subsequent agreements on civilian nuclear cooperation, developing the Chashma power plants. Similarly, they have helped us with developing our Canop 1, Canop 2 and 3. So in terms of, say, civilian nuclear cooperation for power generation, there is no other country that has been willing to help you in that field. Again, the heavy industrial complex in Taxila and now under CPEC, but going back for several years, there has been tremendous amount of cooperation. In terms of trade, China is one of the few countries that have extended a free trade agreement. We have spent years trying to negotiate a free trade agreement with the European Union, which they are not ready to do. Similarly, we have tried to negotiate a free trade agreement with the US. Again, they are not trying to. The US is not even willing to give us any kind of preferential trading opportunities just for the textile sector. I mean, I remember that during the height of this Afghan business, the Afghan war, the Taliban against the Al-Qaeda and all, the Americans were actually had approved the so-called economic opportunity zones in the FATA and adjoining areas of Afghanistan for developing the rural areas of that place. And it was just two states. The representative, the senators from just two states of in the US, North and South Carolina, who have a minuscule textile industry, minuscule. And they objected to this facility, which would have amounted to 0.15% of textile imports by the United States from there. So we are dealing. What I'm saying is based on experience of dealing with all these countries. Every time the EU gets concerned about the violations of human rights in Pakistan, the first thing they come and tell us is that if you fellows don't straighten up your act, we are going to cancel your GSP plus. So now these are kind of threats you don't get from the Chinese. For good or bad, they don't come and tell you how you should do your work. What the most they say is, we hope that you can get your problems sorted out, but they don't make it conditional on those things. So I think there's a major element. The problem is that our businessmen who have the facility of exporting to the Chinese because of the free trade agreement are either too lazy to look at those opportunities or too stuck in their groove of dealing with the West where they can park their money. So that also is another, although they can park their money in China as well, but that's a different question altogether. But while I have, like this, like we say in the international organization racket, while I have the floor, may I just take this opportunity to respond to Mr. Javed Jabbar's question on the Russian-Pakistan relationship. Obviously, for the Russians, the Indians are far more important than Pakistan, and that's a given. But two things have happened. One, the growing American-Indian relationship, and two, the growing Russia-China relationship. For these two reasons, the Russians have been rethinking. And over the last 10 years, the opportunities that have emerged in Russia-Pakistan relations are significant. Some are not well known. What is not very well known, for instance, is the JF-17 Thunder aircraft that we are co-producing with the Chinese, has a Russian engine, and this engine would not have been transferred to Pakistan had it not been for the Russia-China relationship. So that's a major facility. The Russians have held major military exercises with Pakistan, and if you recall, the Indians had objected to those, even including in the northern areas, which the Indians were really upset about. And thirdly, and in a quiet way, we are acquiring military technology as well, apart from the economic and trade relations, the gas, the north-south gas stream, etc. So the relationship with Russia has potential.
Thank you. Any other questions? Because, yes, we just have 5 minutes. One more question, if it's coming from the floor.
Mr. Ambassador, sir, as you said, we should have a good strategic relation with China, and we should have a good strategic relation as well with United States of America. So no, sir, now the current entire story has been changed in between China, USA. We have lot of pressure from European side and the initiative we have been supporting China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and One Belt, One Road interconnectivity for the world international trade. Do you think we will have a more pressure from America, USA to whether we are supposed to be either with the camp of the USA or we should be with the China? So where we should go? Either this side or that side?
Well, I did exactly that. I don't know. I maybe have not was able to articulate myself, but I've said precisely that we need to have a strategic partnership with even deeper. We already have one, but we even need to deepen the strategic partnership with China. And as far as the U.S. is concerned, I maintain that we never had a strategic partnership, and a strategic partnership with the U.S. is not possible. But at the same time, I'm not advocating that we cut off relations or we have hostile relations with them. We should have normal relations with the U.S. to the extent that they are willing to engage with us. And there are some areas on which they are ready to engage. But again, one of the considerations here that I had mentioned was that it should not impinge or undermine our relations with China. That's one. The other is also, obviously, it should not undermine our own relations, our own security. One of the reasons, which I did not have time to go into, but one of the reasons why we have a problem right now with the Taliban government in Afghanistan is because the Taliban view, rightly or wrongly, I'm not aware, but at least in their view, it is Pakistan's cooperation with the United States which, for instance, led to the US operation to kill Ahmad Zawahiri in Kabul, which the Taliban say could only be possible because Pakistan provided airspace. Now, that kind of cooperation is something that is going to have a negative impact on our relations with Afghanistan, or with the Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. So we have to make our own judgment as to whether we need to have that kind of cooperation with the United States or not. So it's a judgment call. I would say that we should not, or at least we should be very clear as to what are the parameters, the rules of engagement in which we will engage in counterterrorism cooperation with the US.
I'm sorry, I have a session later on where I speak, and I think I can take up some of these issues there. But my big takeaway listening to the professor from Moscow and others was, And looking at recent trade relations between China and India, since their border skirmish, trade between China has increased by 34%, and it's now at about $120 billion a year. The point I'm trying to make it is that we should not have this 0-1 binary kind of approach towards foreign relations. We can have multiple and layered relations with countries. We have our differences with India, and they will continue. That should not stop us from having trade relations with India. The same thing with the Chinese. We have an excellent relationship with Chinese, but our Chinese relationship should not determine by what we do with respect to our relationship with other countries. And I think that's what's meant by balanced approach. So this binary approach to relations, I think, is a terrible idea from the point of view of the economy. But I'll have an opportunity to expand on this in my session.
Well, I don't know. It was good to see my friend Aizaz Nabi after so many years. I don't know whether that was a question or a comment. So if it's a comment, I respect his views. Thank you.
Thank you. We are about to end our session. As a conclusion, we can say what we gained from the opinion of the scholars and the participants through their questions. Dr. Moonis Ahmer was very clear, expressing the historical perspective of the topic, that is Pakistan's foreign policy, and it's in its initial stage, but he also recommended that what should be the way ahead, or what should we be looking forward, and that is, according to him, that is, we must first determine our fault lines or gray areas in foreign policy approach, and we must be very clear in our decision making. We must depend upon self-sustenance instead of looking for other countries to help us throughout. And this is something he believes that there has been no proactive research. Hence, no forward-looking policies should be done or given with suggestions. And we, I hope, can find out a way of sending it to the policymakers so that some action can be taken. To Ambassador Zamir Akram, he was very clear in pointing out that there were two basic focuses on relations, though the topic was relations between China and the United States. But since the theme of the session is global affairs or global order, so they are the most important players in that perspective. And he highlighted that we must consider Pakistan, its challenges in this position, and it has to be considering a perennial approach for the security dimensions which have always been there, and because of Pakistan's geographical position in future, since future cannot be exactly predicted, but there can be certain ways in going forward, and those are, we must first consider now strategizing as well as technology development. We must stress on economy or economic concerns and interrelationship, and diplomacy, which should be successful so that we are able to compete in the world. Thank you so much for our foreign speaker first, and then to all our learned scholars who have been here sparing their time, and to the audience who have participated, making it a success. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Tanveer and I rescheduled the schedule, putting the refreshment from 11 to 11:30. Be here at 12 after the refreshments. Thank you very much.